I'd like everybody to stand up for a moment and put out your right hand, palm up. Imagine a feather, or maybe just a pen, something very, very light. This is pretty easy, right? But what if I asked you to hold it up for an hour? It starts to get a little heavier. If I asked you to hold it up for a whole day, probably starts to feel a little sore. After a week, very, very difficult. What if I asked you to hold it up forever? This is what it feels like to be the child of a Holocaust survivor. You can sit down now. I actually did this same talk about 2 weeks ago, and I completely forgot to tell the audience to sit down, and I got into my routine, and they were still standing. I thought, oh, what did I do? What that little exercise is a representation of the invisible weight of a trauma that we didn't even experience firsthand. We were overshadowed by our parents as children, by their experiences. And in their later years, we were responsible for their happiness and their care. We put their needs before ours, always. It was expected. Who are we? What are our identities? We don't know. We are a generation defined by fear, distrust, unexplained anxiety, hypervigilance, and all of those things have a name. It's called intergenerational trauma, and it's real. I want to tell you a little story. It starts in a lab at Emory University, and some researchers wanted to see if this generational transfer of emotions and trauma or any of that was real. So they took a group of prepubescent mice and they put them in a cage and injected the smell of cherry blossoms. And at the same time that the smell of cherry blossoms was put into the cage, they also created an electric current. So over time, these mice associated the smell of cherry blossoms with pain from the electric current. Lo and behold, when they stopped adding the pain component to the cherry blossom smell, the mice still exhibited a fear response. They were afraid that the pain was there. They associated the two together. Now, that's actually interesting in and of itself, but the real point of my story is that 5 and 6 generations of mice later, these mice did not meet their great-great-great-grandmother or grandmother or great-grandfather. When these new mice, this is 5 and 6 generations later, when they were in a cage and the researchers introduced the smell of cherry blossoms, what do you think happened? They exhibited the same fear response as those mice that actually experienced both stimuli at the same time. So this got me thinking. This study came out in 2013, and my mom, who was a survivor, passed away in 2014. So I had this idea in my head that, if the cherry blossoms and the pain were connected, wouldn't the Holocaust and suffering be connected too? All of a sudden, I had a name and a feeling that what I was I had an understanding that what I was feeling was real. So I started to write. I actually started to write what most 2Gs like us write. I started to write my mom's story. And I was working with a neighbor who very insightfully told me, where are you in this story? And I said, it's not my story. This is, we all write our survivor parents' stories and our grandparents. This is what we do. This is our legacy. And she said, oh no, this is your story. This is when you get to have an identity. So I thought about this and ended up about a few months later, Rachel Yehuda's seminal study on Holocaust survivor descendants was published. In her study, she discovered and concluded that our DNA is changed because of our parents' experiences. At this point, I just started researching and writing furiously, and I discovered this 5-step process that I used to come to terms with my trauma that was transmitted to me, and I found a way to lower my hand. So I want to tell you a little story, another story about a woman who came up to me after a talk just like this about 6 months ago. Her name's Rachel, and after my talk, she came up in tears and said, Emily, your story is my story. I am completely paralyzed. I have trouble leaving my house. I'm worried the Gestapo is going to come. I don't give my friends my address because I'm afraid somebody's going to come take me away. And she said, my son is having a baby, and I can see how he's inherited, how I've transmitted some of these same behaviors to him. I don't want my grandchild to feel that. Can you help me? So after just a few months of working with me, we went through my process with her, and she just told me the other day her grandchild was born, her granddaughter, and she and her son are settled. They actually each bought houses. They're like 2 or 3 houses down from each other, and they are settled, and she doesn't feel worried about loud noises and sirens where she thinks that somebody's going to come take her to concentration camp. So, working with me, I helped her understand how she could put her arm down. Unfortunately, not all stories have this happy ending. After yet another talk that I gave in Seattle, a woman came up to me, her name's Naomi, and she said, I'm really nervous. I'm going to Poland in a couple of weeks. My father passed last year, and I'm going to see the concentration camp that he was liberated from. And, I'm going to come back. My rabbi has me all set up for this big talk. I'm supposed to go research and come back with my thoughts and organize them. And I said, I'd like to help you. I think there's some key things that we could do together to prepare you for that incredibly difficult emotional experience. And she said, I got this. I'm really busy in the next 2 weeks before I go, and don't worry about it. I'm going to be fine. I wished her well. Sadly, I got a call about a month after she got back. I'd completely forgotten. And she said, Emily, it was awful. She said, I got all the way to Poland and I couldn't even walk into the camp. She said, I was trembling with fear. I was paralyzed outside the gates. I couldn't go in. She said, I went home. I went back to the hotel. I tried again the next day, and I still couldn't go in. So she went all the way to Poland for a healing experience, and instead of healing, what happened was she reverted back. Actually, she's now worse off than she was before. She told me she's feeling completely badly about herself. She feels like she's a failure, and she's been in a depression. And she said, Emily, do you think we could work together now? And so we're exploring that at this point. Before I end, I'd like everybody to put out their arm again. And this time, it's your choice. Are you ready to release the invisible weight? Are you ready to take the burden off your shoulders? If you are, I'd love to help you. Just know that it's possible. Thank you.